So welcome along then to our end of season reviews, and once again we're here down at the Five Rivers in Beavers Valley, and if you're watching on YouTube you can click on the card above our heads to listen to the bumper edition of the end of season reviews, available to download on most audio platforms also below the show. But for YouTube, enjoy our bite-sized reviews of the 2018-19 season, and we'll be taking your questions and clips along the way. This episode is once again sponsored by OneFootball, and do make sure you check out the excellent free OneFootball app to keep up to date and be first to know of all the latest transfer news, the rumours, stats and scores, all in one place. To download the OneFootball app, click the link in the description. Here we go then. Nick is alongside me for our end of season reviews, and I suppose for this part of the show then we'll break it up into pre-season into December, and then December into the end of May. And we did change the format this season. Nick, do you still know what a podcast is?
I haven't got a clue what it is, really. I've got a rough idea that you can download it, but I've never done one myself.
Well, here we are. There's a first for everything. But I suppose it can be said the season can be broken up into... It's a cliche. It can be broken up into a game of two halves. And quite simply, it's before Hasenhuttl and after Hasenhuttl.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's split up into December. Once Ralph Hasenhuttl came, it all changed. And suddenly and slowly but surely, we pulled our way up the league and out of relegation. And, of course, kept our part of the bargain by staying out of the Championship, and just waited for Portsmouth to keep their half and stay out of the Championship.
See you next season, they said.
Yeah, exactly.
So I suppose if we cast our minds back to the summer of last year, pre-season started in China. I mean, how was it, Nick? You popped yourself over to the other side of the world?
Yeah, I went over. I mean, not particularly because I wanted to see Saints play in a pre-season tour in China, but, you know, although the exclusivity of it, in that there were only, I think, two other people who went to both games over there, and that was Mick Strickland of the London Saints and his wife. It was just really to go and have a look at China and its history and the Great Wall of China. And, you know, I've flown the Southampton flag on the Great Wall of China, and that's good. But it was very much an experimental side. It was while the World Cup was going on, so we had a few players away, I think. And it was just, once you got there in the games, you thought, why did I bother? But it was the experience of the entire trip.
And there were some suggestive reports actually coming out of, you know, doesn't matter what sort of tabloids. It said it was basically just a holiday camp, you know, the boys to go over for a little bit of a jolly to enjoy themselves. And it was a selected 11, you know, like you just said, a few of the players that were just coming off the end of the World Cup.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was basically, we didn't have any of our international players who were at the World Cup at all. It was just a chance for get the squad together and have a little bit of a kick around. I mean, the first game over there was Schalke, which was in Shanghai. Shanghai got a 27 million population. The game was in Shanghai. I was staying in the virtual centre of Shanghai, and the game's 40 miles to the north, still in Shanghai. So Saints v Schalke, I mean, there's a reasonable crowd there. But it was all about, really, when you looked about it, trying to build the Southampton brand in Shanghai, in China or Shanghai. I mean, Schalke, who played there before, were light years ahead of us in the fact they'd mini tournaments with kids running around in little Schalke T-shirts and Schalke flags, etc., and we put a few clappers out and a couple of T-shirts. But we have to start somewhere. But it was a good trip. I mean, it was a draw, I think, 3-3. And it was good. It was a good experience. And weirdly enough, there were a few Chinese Saints fans who seemed well organised. Whether that was sort of from a corporate perspective, someone had gotten, but they had a massive, great flag, bizarrely with the Saints crest on one side, half of it, and image of Mark Hughes on the other. So that was the first friendly, and then we travelled up to a place I can't even remember the name of, to play Jiangsu Suning, which Jiangsu Suning it wasn't their home ground. They played about 150 miles south, but it was aimed, you know, this little town which I'd never heard of, had a population of 1 million, so roughly 4 times the size of Southampton. It had a 30,000 capacity stadium, but it didn't have a team playing in it. So this was very much, again, bring a big Chinese team and a Premier League team and try and build interest.
It's very much a commercial trip, and the first time I suppose Southampton have been over to the Far East, and obviously it goes without saying, the ties are there with our owner. And I suppose if we talk about the results, like you said, it was 3-3 against Schalke, and well done on the pronunciation on Jiangsu Sunning, 2-3. But I suppose if we fast forward just to...
I've got the T-shirt on, Jiangsu Sunning.
I suppose if we fast forward about a week or two after that, if we just quickly go through the friendly results, it's 3 wins, a win in France against Dijon, a win at home against Celta Vigo 3-2, and I suppose 2 somewhat humiliating defeats against Derby and Borussia Mönchengladbach.
Well, on one hand, I never really take any interest in pre-season friendlies. When I was a young kid, when the FA Cup mattered, so did pre-season friendlies. The teams went out there hell for leather to show that they got their places, and the players get their places and sides. Nowadays, it's not like that. They're training games. They're nothing more. So I don't take any real credence in pre-season results, although in this case, looking back with hindsight, it was very prophetical.
And I suppose if it wasn't groundbreaking nor convincing by any stretch, and I suppose if we go into the start of the season, there were some kind of hopes and dreams. We thought Mark Hughes would actually sort of kick on as a manager, but it's 4 points from the first 4 games and a win in the League Cup at Brighton. Not a bad start, but ultimately a little underwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the benefit of hindsight, Mark Hughes was appointed not because he'd saved Saints from relegation, but because Swansea had blown up the previous season. Mark Hughes' record in charge of Saints was appalling, really, but Swansea's was even worse. And you hoped when he was appointed that he perhaps had more influence than it perhaps showed. And that as a permanent manager, the players might be a bit more respectful of him and he'd get things organised. But that didn't turn out to be the case. At the end of last season, the players basically got their own adrenaline going and pulled out a couple of good results at the end of the season in spite of Mark Hughes, not because of him. And although it started reasonably well, I mean, a 0-0 draw with Burnley was pretty much par for the course for a Burnley side that didn't let many goals in.
I mean, they had been playing Europa League in the qualification rounds a week before as well, so you could say that their fitness levels were just ahead of us.
I would say that. I mean, generally, those playing in the Europa League, as you say, are ahead in both fitness and also in the fact that they're playing as a team. They're used to each other again. They got the ball. So the teams that... The Europa League syndrome, where teams who play in the early rounds, it doesn't really kick in straight away. It kicks in about 4 games in when everyone's up to the same fitness levels, and the team who started out in July in the Europa League is feeling a bit jaded. So we probably played them at the wrong time. I mean, going on, we then went to Everton, and on the face of it, what was a 2-1 defeat looked fairly reasonable. I mean, it was a game we should have won. I mean, the Everton goalkeeper should have been sent off for a
Pickford's karate kick.
Yeah, Jordan Pickford's karate kick on Danny Ings was disgusting, and the fact that the referee didn't pick it up was disgusting. And we should have got something there.
I guess if we come back to the to St Mary's at the end of the month with a. I mean, if you look at it, we always look at when the fixtures have come out. You look at the start, the middle, and the end. And I suppose if you kind of you set targets for yourself at the start of the season, don't you? And on paper, perhaps we should have looked. Maybe a lot of people were saying 6 to 9 points would have been a fairly decent return, but underwhelming start, really.
Yeah, I mean, the start in the first 4 games. I mean, coming on. I mean, we then played Leicester. That was probably set the tone for the season because we didn't play badly against Leicester. And then we gave away a last-minute goal, a poor, sloppy goal that should have been prevented, and that set the tone. Although, ironically, in the 4th game, we went to Crystal Palace and put in a decent performance. I think was it Danny Ings scored the first and Pierre Højbjerg the second, and it was a decent team performance. And but at the end of the day, it was 4 points in 4 games, which was not really great.
And if we move on, it's largely forgettable from there, including a 5-game run. We're not going to bore you with all the results, but I suppose a highlight, in fact, of the game in September was Guillermo Højbjerg's drill right into the bottom corner, reminiscent of Cuco Martinez's strike a few years ago on Boxing Day.
Where at Palace?
Brighton at home.
Oh, Brighton at home. Sorry, yes. Again, Brighton at home we set the tone for the season. I mean, we were 2-0 up with 20 minutes to go, and we conceded a last-minute penalty. And I mean, what it told us was that we were scared. I mean, the defence knew that it wasn't playing well. I mean, the goalkeeper wasn't coming for the ball as he did in the final games of last season. Vestergaard was struggling big time to really settle and get a grip of the game. And he was struggling. I mean, ironically, I think Wesley Holt was the best defender at that time. And certainly he's the defender that got the most clean sheets. But we were struggling big time in defence. And teams like Brighton, especially Brighton, who relied very much on Glenn Murray to get on the end of long balls and crosses into the box. The reason we concede late goals is because they looked at our team and right through to the end of the season knew that when you go route one at the end, we panic. And that was from the start to the end of the season.
And succeed in that. We're struggling to score goals. It was 5 games without a goal, only to be broken at Man City, a humiliating defeat. And then followed by a win in the League Cup, albeit on penalties at Everton. But following that, like you said, it did set the tone for the season. But I'm a big fan of video assistant referees, and finally it was a straw that broke the camel's back at home at Watford with Charlie Austin's rant after the game.
Yeah, but I think it wasn't that. I think he was found to be offside, wasn't he, in that game?
Well, it played out that Yoshida was eventually called offside.
Yeah.
But if you look at the replay, the flight of the ball was sort of nowhere near Yoshida, or in fact, he wasn't interfering with the line of sight of the goalkeeper. So it should have been a legitimate goal.
Yeah, I mean, that was the luck Saints were having. And I mean, the problem I felt at the time that, going forward, despite the fact at times we were struggling to score goals, we were a lot better organised than the previous season. And I think when we went into that period where we had a few 0-0 draws, notably Bournemouth away, Newcastle at home, etc., we reverted back to sort of like we were under Claude Puel, that we were afraid to cross the halfway line because we knew the defence couldn't deal with, quick breaks from the opposition. And that meant that we didn't get forward enough. We didn't get men forward enough in the box. But if I'd have been a midfield player for Saints, or I'd have been a forward for Saints in the first half of last season, or indeed the second half, I'd have been very frustrated because too many times a lot of good work going forward was undone by poor defending at the back. And, as you say, we weren't getting the rub of the green. Again, after Watford, we went to Fulham, which was perhaps the low point of the season, because we went 1-0 up, and then we went 2-1 down, we came back to 2-2, and then we threw the game away. And it was all, ironically, again, I mean, I'm not the greatest fan of Wesley Holt, but I think he was the best of a bad bunch in the first half of the last season. Again, we like a good scapegoat here, and I think people gave him a scapegoat. But at the time, people were telling me, no, Jack Stevens is better than Wesley Holt, blah, blah, blah. But I tell you what, at the tail end of the season, there's not many people who would have preferred to see Jack Stevens in, apart from Wesley Holt. Again, the benefit of hindsight. But the fact is, in that game, yes, Hoyt, or Holt, or however you want to say him, well, let's just call him Wesley. He had a shot charged down, which resulted in their winner. But all 3 goals resulted from 3 shots on goal, or headers on goal from inside the 6-yard box. And that was a team, that was the bottom of it. And at that stage, you're thinking, I can't see much light at the end of the tunnel here.
And in fact, I remember speaking to Wiz outside the Craven Cottage that night, and he said, anybody is better than Mark Hughes. Even Nick Illingsworth is better than Mark Hughes.
Who'd you bring in? That's the trouble. Who do you bring in? Anybody's better. Nick Illingsworth's better than that prick. Let's get him in.
Cheers, Wes.
And he was probably right. In fairness, my managerial record in this city is a lot better in points per game ratio than Mark Hughes. I mean, ironically, we then played Manchester United at home, where again we took a 2-0 lead and then conceded 2 soft goals, of which my friend Wesley could not be blamed because he'd been dropped by that stage. But even losing Hoyt, Wesley, we still had the same mistakes. We had the real problem was the defenders didn't go to ground. The 2 goals from Manchester United, if I remember, were both fairly similar. They broke down the right. I think Yoshida followed the man in, and then the bloke's got to the byline, and we haven't got a block in. And the cross has gone in, unmarked, bang, and that happened twice. So ironically, Mark Hughes' last game in charge was probably his best.
Yeah, ironically, and in fact, we saw a bit of spirit, some bravery, in fact. And if we highlight that game in particular, I don't suppose anybody really thought Cedric had it in him to strike that free kick into the top corner.
No, it's a great goal. Again, Cedric the scapegoat. Saint's career at that stage was barely a month left of the season, so it gave us a little bit of hope. But the problem is, whatever we done, the same problems were still there in the centre of defence. They didn't get the tackles in, they didn't block, they didn't mark people. And that continued from day one to the final day of the season.
It just seems we never learn from our mistakes. And that was, I suppose, the theme of the season. Even despite, obviously Hasenhuttl coming in, the theme still continued that we were losing games from winning positions.
Yeah, and I mean, there's reasons for that. And I think, just to jump forward a month or so to the January transfer window, that at this stage, Ralph Hasenhuttl had decided, they'd sat down with the club and decided that if they couldn't get the targets they wanted, they wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the previous year where they signed a player for 20 million just because they had to sign a player and had to do that. And they'd taken the calculated gamble, which ultimately proved right, that they could get through a season with the players they had in the centre of defence and then save their money for the summer where they could get the targets they wanted, hopefully. But it was soft and it continued. And ironically, when you look at the number of just the number of goals we gave away in the last minute, we'd have been comfortably mid-table long before we were. And as you say, after Ralph has come in, if Ralph's points per game ratio for the whole season would have put us up into 11th place.
Well, hold that thought for a moment because that's a question later on from one of our viewers. But I suppose if we quickly look at the results from, Crystal Palace in December. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games without a win. And ultimately, the Man United game, Mark Hughes was finally sacked, leaving us with 9 points from 14 games in the Premier League, sitting in 18th place.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard to see any way back at that point. You had a manager who clearly was a rabbit staring into the headline, didn't seem to know what he was doing. You had a team which was totally in disarray in the back. Whoever was in there, it's totally in disarray. And indeed, even under Ralph, the goals per game ratio conceded is just as bad as the first half of the season under Mark Hughes. But we're just giving away goals and everything. And at this point, it was probably the lowest ebb of the season. When we went to Spurs, okay, you had Calvin Davis in charge. He revamped the team a bit, but it was still the same. We put in a reasonable performance, but just gave away stupid goals at the back.
And that feeling spread across the entire camp, I suppose, from the tea lady right to the executives. And ultimately, I suppose it must be said that my patience and my enthusiasm for the season had been tested up until that point. And it got to a point, speaking to the fans every sort of week in, week out, and you're kind of expecting the same every time, and a lot of frustrated fans, and I would have found it extremely difficult had Mark Hughes continued.
Yeah, I mean, naturally, it saps your enthusiasm, it saps your energy, and The issue is when you're doing the same things and getting the same results.
That's the definition of madness, isn't it? One man once said, isn't it?
Possibly, or the specials. Or there are other ska bands available, but yeah, I mean, if you do the same things, you're doomed to repeat history endlessly, and that's fine if you're Manchester City, but not so great if you're Saints and fighting relegation battles. And I mean, ironically, and I've said this throughout the season, the midfield and attack were fairly decent. It's a back four. If we'd have had Virgil van Dijk and Jose Fonte in centre halves, we'd have probably comfortably finished top 10 this season, especially if Ralph had been there from the start.
So a question then, I suppose nicely tying into that statement there, Nick, we have a question from Damon over on Twitter. Could Mark Hughes have turned it around if he had stayed?
You could never say never, but there was no real evidence to show that he could, is the answer there. There was no inspiration. The longer he stayed, the more the fans would have gotten their back. Something had to change.
All right, so moving on then to the second half of the season, and I suppose quickly a chance for us to grab ourselves a refreshment, and we'll be back in a second.